All right. So we're going to get started and we're going to go through this super quick. But what I wanted to show you was how we can use is fairly difficult sometimes. And we sometimes need a little bit of techniques to help us get there. And so we're just going to start out with a really simple AI program. And so I'm using a library called Miroscope. So I'll just walk through sort of the basic setup that we have here. So we have this llm.call decorator, and that's just Miroscope code to say that this function is going to call an LLM. And then we also have a prompt template decorator, and that tells Miroscope what prompt we would like to use. And so our prompt is to explain a topic, be thorough and detailed, and we want it to write like a human. So we don't want it to be too formal. It should be a little bit messy, maybe not too formulaic. We want it to be engaging. And so what all of this block says is basically I can call this function explain concept and provide a topic, and then a call to an LLM GPT-4o mini will be made. And then we will get the response from the AI here. And so we have just a basic setup to go ahead and run this AI. And so let's try this out. And so if we do uv run main.py, we'll see it asks us for a topic to explain. I'll go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to ask it to explain my favorite movie, Mean Girls. And so we'll wait for a few seconds so it can generate the explanation. We're not using streaming or anything here, so it's going to wait for the full response. But so we get a lot of text here. So Mean Girls is this iconic teen comedy movie that came out in 2004. It's really one of those films that just sticks with you, written by Tina Fey, who mostly makes you laugh, but also delivers some pretty sharp observations about high school life. Blah, blah, blah. This seems kind of like, pretty formulaic, always this like 3-line thing. And so we could ask an AI if it thinks this was written by AI. So let's go ahead and do that. And I already have the code written, so I'm going to go ahead and just pop it out of my stash. That way, we don't have to waste time live coding. But what we're going to do is add another AI function that is essentially a kind of validator. And so here we're going to use some structured outputs. And so we're going to define a class for our structured outputs. I often like to add a reasoning field to enable chain of thought. We're going to have the response tell us whether it thinks that it was written by AI, and then provide feedback. And then we're going to have another LLM call. And this time we're going to use O4 Mini because we want it to be able to like really dig in and spend a lot of time thinking. And by the way, that maybe means we don't need this reasoning field at all because this is a thinking model. And we give it a prompt that basically tells it to try to determine if an AI wrote it. And then we're going to give it the topic that we provided, and then also the explanation, which is the response from the original AI. And so now we have another LLM function where we can provide it the explanation and the topic and get feedback. And so we can essentially do something simple whereby we just get the explanation like we did last time, and then pass it through to the judge to get feedback. But the judge might come back and probably in a lot of cases is going to say that, yes, this was written by an AI. And what do you do in that situation? Well, you could choose to still return it to the end user. And maybe that's not going to provide a great experience because the quality might be not what you want for users. You could just raise an error, which also is a pretty bad user experience. But there's a third option. You could actually regenerate a response. But if you do that naively, you're probably just going to get a similar quality response. So what we can do is actually take this feedback and give it back to the AI that generates the response and tell it what it did wrong. And so we've modified now our original function. And now instead of only taking one argument, it also can take an optional previous draft and optional feedback. And then we basically say, address feedback to the previous draft if provided. And so now we can essentially, after asking if the feedback we got was written by an AI, we can ask it to re-explain providing the response and the feedback so that our new response now will have hopefully addressed that feedback. And then, we can basically rejudge it. Now, if you want, you could even put this into a loop and run it multiple times so you continuously refine an answer. That gets closer to a concept called gleaning, which I've discussed in some of my other content. But this is a really powerful technique. So let's go ahead and run this and just see what we get. So in our topic to explain, again, I love my Mean Girls. We'll wait for the explanation. So we got that initial explanation, and now it's going to take a little bit of time to do the judging. But notice this looks pretty similar in structure, initial response we got. And we see that it thinks it was written by an AI, and then it gives some feedback to make the explanation feel more authentically human. Try adding personal observations or reactions. Include minor flaws or unique takes, such as noting a moment you found particularly cliche or unexpectedly touching. And so now we see another response being generated, which is basically just a new response with this feedback taken into account. So Mean Girls is like the quintessential high school movie that's stuck in the pop culture psyche since it dropped in 2004. I mean, who doesn't know about the plastics or that iconic "on Wednesdays we wear pink" line? It's definitely still relevant, even if we've all graduated and moved on. So already, I think that the language here feels a little bit more human. If we scroll all the way down here, this still thinks it was written by AI. And so we could go and do multiple rounds of iteration. Note that every time you're doing these additional LLM calls, though, you're adding latency and cost. And so this is a very powerful technique. However, only if we can afford the cost and latency that it brings. So hopefully this was valuable and useful to you. All of this code will be available in the AI Livestreams GitHub repo, so feel free to go check that out if you want. And thank you.